Hey there, and welcome. So, Side Effects is holding a new Houdini art challenge called Mardini, which is starting on the 1st of March. The idea of it is to create an artwork in Houdini based on a daily prompt. That prompt is basically just a theme to base your artwork around. It's open to anyone who would like to enter, and if you do enter, it doesn't have to be every day. Last year, there were prizes for Best Daily, Best Weekly, Best Collection, Best Overall Artwork, and for entering every day. So, as you may know, I won Best Collection in last year's Who Lie Art Challenge, and I've decided to do a daily review video for each day's entries. I'm going to be talking about the winning entries, what makes them so good, and then I'm also going to be talking about some of the other entries. I'll go over what I like about them, what I think could maybe be changed, and how they could have been winning entries in my opinion. So if you'd like me to review your entry, feel free to tag me on Instagram at 9_between. So with all of that comes a bit of a disclaimer. Everything that I'm saying here is my own opinion. It doesn't make it right or wrong. I'm just trying to give a critique that the artist can work from and hopefully something that you can learn from as well. I'm not trying to make fun of or insult or belittle any of the artists. I'm merely just trying to give some feedback in an entertaining way. So let's get straight into it. In third place for day 11 wave, we have this awesome entry by Adrian Lambert. What he's gone for here is definitely not the typical type of image that you would go for. There's nothing leaning towards the side of a natural wave. He's gone for the shape of a wave. So these waving elements within this building, within the structure. And let's go through the elements that make this so interesting. So firstly, the camera angle. We really get a sense of the scale of this. By looking up at this angle, it gives you the idea of a skyscraper. There's also sort of relatable motifs or ideas, such as these windows, and we get an idea of the scale of a window. So this really gives us a better idea of how big this might be. The other thing is this aerial perspective, I believe it's called, where you sort of have this variation depending on distance. I'll have a little description up of what it actually is, but it's basically this sort of atmospheric change to the object depending on distance from the camera. So this also helps with the sense of scale. They've got very ominous lighting. It really just makes this feel immense. They have some very nice grain. This is something that I haven't seen too often. But if you look at the grain in the shadows, I believe this is added in post. I might be wrong, but I'm fairly certain that that's added in post. It's much too uniform to be just from the render. So I do believe that this is added in post. It gives it a more tactile feel, makes it seem less like a render and more like a printed image. So overall, awesome entry. Love all of the elements of this. I think it's amazing. In second place, we have this entry by Daniel Gods. And what he has here is this sort of tapestry. So instead of going for anything like dynamic, he's gone for a soft-based approach. And really, this might be one of the best ways to go about doing it. You get the idea of a wave. He's got this artwork that has this wave pattern in it. And as always, Daniel's rendering is just so good. So this variation in the light over here, this shallow depth of field that you see in the foreground, the colors, the attention to detail, everything about it just looks so good. Can't fault him at all. I think that this is a beautiful entry, very well rendered. So yeah, props to him. I think that everything that he's done so far is great. And in first place, we have this incredible entry by Oscar. Oscar. So this entry is potentially one of the best entries from both Who Lie and Mardini. I think that it's that good. Firstly, conceptually, it's brilliant. So he has this wave, but it's not really dynamics based, right? It's just a piece of geometry. And he hits two birds with one stone. Once again, you got the Martini or Mardini glass, little olive over here. And this render is just so good looking. So they have this absorption of the blue in the water. And this is something that you'll usually only see at depth, when water has a lot of depth to it. But they did it at this small scale, and so this wave still feels substantial, like there's a sort of depth to it. This mist that's coming off looks incredible. It does look like sea mist in that it's not just a volumetric, it looks like there's particles to it. So that looks incredible. As for all of the other elements, the light hitting here and doing this sort of sparkle looks incredible. And even though there's no real gradient in the background, this is one case where having this in a void makes it better because you're focusing on elements like lighting. The light hitting the edges, the light against the transmission, and then there's just this very fine attention to detail, such as the condensation on this olive. But yeah, I can't fault this at all. It's a near perfect entry by Oscar, so awesome stuff. In third place in the animation category, we have this entry by NQ. And they have this wave that goes over, and as it hits each of these boys, they light up. So there's a couple of wonderful elements to this. Firstly, they've contained this, so they don't have to do ocean simulation. I believe this is just ocean spectrum, right? There's no simulation going on here as far as I can tell. And they just have this great sort of element where these light up. By doing this, you're relying on some very unique elements to provide the detail in the shot. Of course, they could have just done the wave, but it may have been boring. So they add this extra element with these as they light up. And of course, the light adds so much detail to this. You end up with these light streaks once again, and it just looks great. So wonderful entry by NQ. I think they did a great job with this one. Unique concept which has been executed excellently. So yeah, love it. In second place, we have this entry by Peter Akara. And this is once again a very unique take. They have these sort of what looks like floorboards basically, but these sort of ribbons of wood. And the way that it moves is very interesting. They've gone for something that's not really dynamics based as far as I can tell. Once again, this does look like SOPs to me. I think this could be just a lot of curves with a sort of carve or something going on. But yeah, they've got this great motion going on in a way that doesn't rely on the usual expected sort of water simulation. So wonderfully done. They've got a good lighting setup where they have the light coming in from the top. And the setup feels a bit like an art gallery or something like that. And there's just a very good feel to it. They don't really have to rely on realism or anything because a lot of the interest in the shot just comes from the movement. So yeah, I think that this is a very interesting entry, conceptually very different, and that makes it fun and enjoyable. So I like this entry a lot. I definitely think that it deserves a top 3 place. And in first place, we have this entry from Toast. So they've got this lighting that really sets the scene as a surfing scene. This is kind of what I picture when I think of surfing, right? This sort of scene. Once again, they've taken a very archetypal scene, something that we are familiar with, and they've abstracted it. And so they've got this pink surfboard, once again, very simple geometry. They've got this great spaghetti dude in this very dynamic pose, where it sort of looks like, you know, either arms or hair towards the back, and this leg up front in this dynamic pose. And by doing this, once again, they're avoiding having to do any sort of complex modeling or rigging. They just have this spaghetti creature. I keep calling it a spaghetti creature. It's not really spaghetti, but yeah, there's a lot of wonderful elements to this shallow depth of field, which blurs out this ocean mist up front, as well as the ocean in the background. It also makes us feel like the scale is a bit smaller than true to life, because this shallow depth of field is very shallow, so this makes it seem like a slightly smaller surfboard. But yeah, I think that this is a very fun entry. They did a great job with the variation as the wave moves. You can see that there's a little bit of bounce to it. You know, it's not the same all the way through. The surfboard's got some wobble to it. Every single element in the shot is great, from lighting to environment, to the character design, to the dynamism, and finally the conceptual idea. So everything about this is great. Very nice entry by Toast. Time for Mardini review. For the special mention entry, I think I'm going to go with this one. From DNS Fox. I think it's really pretty. The sort of cherry blossom wave. I think the only issue is that these little things in the foreground don't really look like petals. I think if you had to trick people and make these petals more detailed in the front, and then sort of keep those at the back the way they are, then people see this in the foreground. They're like, whoa, it's highly detailed. But in the background, you can just sort of have the proxy versions. I think it's lovely. Very nice. I definitely think that this could be a top 3 entry. So a special mention to this one by DNS Fox. This entry by Thomas Klein Christensen is really nice. So they made this inspired by the Danish architect Henning Larsen. and this is the wave element to it. I love that they put this into a scene, and I'm always a sucker for sort of reflections in water. It always looks so good. Doesn't matter what it is, it just looks good when it's reflected in water, especially if it happens to be light. Lights look great when they're reflected in water, but this looks very realistic for very little texture input. So of course this HDRI, these trees look a little bit odd because, you know, they're large scale. What I might have done is rotated the HDRI a little bit that way, so that maybe these trees are out of shot, then it maybe looks a bit more realistic. But I think that it's a very nicely fleshed out environment. At first glance it looks great. Of course, when you start looking at the smaller details, you start to notice that there's things that aren't textured as well as they should be, and the scaling is a little bit off, but I still think that this is awesome. I think that it's definitely a contender for that top 3. So yeah, nice entry by Thomas Klein Christensen. This entry by Demagel Haze Hugo, it's sort of Lego, sort of Minecraft. This is interesting. I do like this. I'm not sure how they did this actually. This might be that VDB technique where you replace the voxels with little blocks. It's really cool. Yeah, I mean, I don't have much to say about it. I think that it looks nice. Perhaps you could do a sort of blue background so it looks like the sky. Yeah, I think that this is just a lighting and color thing that it makes us feel a bit off. But I think that if this was animated, it would be incredible. But as a still, I think that there just needs to be a slightly better lighting setup. And I'm sorry that I can't be more help with this, because I'm not exactly sure how. So, whoops. I'm pretty bad at reviews, it seems. It's entry by Marcel66. This is pretty good. Like, this white water doesn't look bad. Of course, a bit low resolution, but daily challenge, whatever. I never bother about low quality simulation at a daily challenge. There's only so much you can do. This ship though, interested to know if this was from like an existing project, because this is a really well detailed ship. There's insane amounts of detail on that. If that's not from some other project that they worked on and it was done like during the day, that's insane. It's a lot of detail. But yeah, I think it's nicely textured, good lighting. Maybe the ocean spectrum is a little bit choppy. This actually looks like it might be a grid with not enough tessellation. So when you do ocean spectrum, you don't actually use the high resolution grid. You just use like a low resolution grid. You export the displacement maps from the ocean spectrum, and then you apply it as displacement. That's like the most efficient way to use it. But this looks like either they used the high resolution grid or they didn't use tessellation for their displacement. So as you can see, there's like slight artifacts in the water, these sort of black areas. I believe that's like intersecting geometry or something. But yeah, I think that this might be an issue with how the ocean spectrum was used. I do think that it looks good, and you do have variation in the ocean spectrum and things, but I think this could be cleaned up a bit, finessed a bit, and it would be a great entry then. I always appreciate sort of different approaches to the topic and different art styles. I think this is so cool. Shadow depth of field with the style. This is something that I don't think I've seen before. So I always appreciate that, because the thing is, right, this might not be perfect, but this is a style that you could adopt and make some awesome artworks from. So this in itself isn't sort of the peak of the style. You could take the style and adapt it to do some sick stuff with it. Yeah, so I like to give credit for things like this. I think this is awesome. Lovely style to it. From Rio Kanda. Oh, they're the person that usually does the little pink blob that I've grown to like so much. Just goes to show they can do other styles, and I think that the style is very nice. Trevor J. Yeah, this does look like an album cover, you're right. Oh, if anyone's interested and they do want to turn this into what seems like an album cover, what you could do is grunge it up a bit with sort of noise patterns and stuff. So not the actual simulation or anything. Oh, that's not a simulation, but not the actual dynamics. You grunge it up with dust specks and like heavy grain. I think that could be sick. Yeah, that looks interesting. This entry, right, has a lot of potential. So this is from, I don't know how to go about saying that. Inisa? Yeah, Inisa. Anyways, I think that this has a lot of potential, especially if you sort of take from Carl Drifter's day one entry, where you had those little bouncy dudes on the stands with the emoji faces. If you take something like that and adapt it to this, then I think it's awesome. So you increase render quality, add a bit more variation, a bit more interest to this, change your lighting, chromatic aberration. I think you just need to make things slightly more interesting by adding little details, and then it would be sick. So I've been checking these entries from Drasko Ivishik, and they never cease to be weird. This one's kind of cool. This one's funky, man. I can vibe to this. Yeah. I think everyone should just stop to appreciate these little bits of dust and things in the air. Shallow depth of field, detail on the cloth. This is nice. Beasel's always putting out good entries, so not much of a surprise here. It just looks so good. Credit where credit is due. And oh, it's a viewport render even. But this is very nice simulation. By Tau 2001-26. Simulation looks great. And it's just a viewport render. I think this is nice, very nice. Not enough credit being given here. This looks good. How are people so creative? And drives me crazy. Alright, I wish I could always be creative. I have moments. Seeing things like this, it's so good. Yeah, Carl Kraus, this is conceptually awesome. I think the only place it's being let down is the rendering a bit. Maybe the color scheme, maybe the composition, not sure. There's a couple of little minor tweaks that could be made to improve this, but I think conceptually it's so good. There's so many good, like, conceptual entries here. This over here, the sort of flick over with the color scheme looks exceptional. I think obviously this isn't rendered as well as it could be. It's also kind of low res. You can see the faceting on these poly wires. But yeah, once again, like, this is quite pretty. I can picture it as like a fully fleshed out, well-rendered scene where you have maybe iridescence and all of those things. So this is more like fish scales rather than, you know, just these sort of flat colors. That's cool. By Jakrapong Suntiskaltam. Jakrapong Suntiskaltam. Yeah. This is like the most deadpan entry in the whole competition. Wave. Is this I assume this is a play on words. It's called Paperwork Final 2. So yeah, it's just these are waivers, I guess. Hey, this is kind of similar to what I did last year for Wave. One's nice. I like the way that the sort of glass panel on the front really affects the color behind it. This looks cool. And it goes with this over here and this changing over here. It's pretty sick. Ooh. Pushing up the volume on this. If you can't tell, I'm head bopping. It's pretty cool that they've done, sorry to stop the music, it actually deserves to keep going. But I like that they've done this with, I assume, chops, where they have the music-driven effect. I was going to do a tutorial on this a while ago. I don't know what happened to the file for it. It was meant for an artless thing. So yeah, like this is cool. The fact that you've got everything in place for this means that you can sort of take this and just improve on the setup. All of the same tips that I've said before. Sort of improve the quality of your materials. So this is a very basic material. What could be cool is if you give it a bit of thickness, smooth it up a bit, and then apply maybe like a cotton texture. Who knows? Or if you make these look like glass. Also, there's a little bit of a lack of a focal point. So I think the main thing is just that the render needs to be more interesting. Add a bit more detail to it, texture these things, give them a bit of thickness, subdivide them so that there's no faceting on them. I think the lighting is quite nice. All of this lighting hitting this over here, the sort of bright lighting, I think is cool. Yeah, I think the main issue with this is just that there's not enough to look at. So even though you've got a great sort of chopnet type thing, actually still not sure if it's chopnet, but this audio driven effect, the fact that you have that is awesome. I think you just need to make sure that the render matches up to the quality of the effect and to the quality of the audio. Like, I think this is awesome. There could just be some changes to rendering. Yeah, well, yeah, the very next entry from Aspen XL, beautifully rendered, right? If you take this sort of rendering and apply it to this sort of shot, then you've probably got a winning entry, right? So yeah, I think that the only issue with this one is that there's maybe not enough dynamism to it. So you take something like this and you apply this. You can even do vellum on this, right? So what you can do is that if this is driven by audio, you can then use that as a soft constraint in vellum. So you can still have this nice flowing vellum movement, but it can still be audio driven underneath, right? So the underlying dynamics come from audio driven effects. Then it could be very cool. So I think that these two guys, if they do a little fusion and become Aspen Society, then they would have a winning entry. I think these two would be awesome combined. It's another awesome entry by Cameron McManus. This is a nice conceptual idea, having this hands wave. So, you know what? Why not have a hand wave, I guess? He's got a lovely level of detail. There's slight variation in the surface. These little bubbles in the water look awesome. Yeah, I think that the lighting catching on this is nice. There's a very muted background. Once again, this sort of color and lighting is reminiscent of that first place entry with the spaghetti dude. So awesome work on the lighting and that. Like, everything about this is nice. Yeah, I think it's cool. Wow, that's a sick simulation. If this wasn't so jittery, I'm not sure why it is jittery though, but if it wasn't so jittery, it would be awesome. I'm just not sure why it's kind of jittery and there's weird artifacts and things. Like, you can see that, right? These sort of black specks that show up all over. Like, this is good, except for those artifacts. That's by Atikuslv. Atikuslv. That's how I'm going to say it. I don't know how you want to say it. So that's it for today's review. Yeah, okay. So I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.